Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us on the Moss House podcast. Today we have Kiani Kodama, the current resident artist here at Moss House, October 2024. Kiani Kodama was born 1996 in Seattle, Washington, and is currently a Brooklyn-based artist who earned a BFA from the Cooper Union School of Art in 2020 with additional study at Kyoto Seika University in 2008. Currently a member of the Trestle Art Space, Kodama received the Shiming Foundation Art Grant in 2023 and held roles as Curator-in-Residence at Underland Gallery and resident at the LA Warman Writers Residency. They have exhibited in notable spaces including the NARS Foundation, Populi Gallery, the Godwin-Ternbach Museum, with recent curatorial projects like Mourning a Star-Shaped Grave at Underland Gallery and Deliverance at Trestle Art Space. Kodama is also active as an exhibit organizer and advisor, collaborating with organizations such as the Brooklyn Children's Museum and Brooklyn Public Library. Advocating for accessibility and shared knowledge, Kodama teaches pottery at Greenwich House Pottery and Mouse Ceramic Studio. Their work highlights community engagement, knowledge sharing, and the cultural intersections of art and public programs throughout New York. If you'd like to follow Kiani's work, their Instagram handle is Kiani Kodama. But thank you for joining us, Kiani.
Thank you for having me.
I was going to start with this first question. If you can, maybe if there's anything else you'd like to share in your introduction, or can you just do a quick overview of the work that you're doing now?
Yeah, so right now I am kind of gathering a lot of different, primarily cultural objects that are interesting to me. Right now that's mostly massage objects, reflexology objects, different types of Japanese footwear, and I've been manipulating their surfaces with various methods like burning, tinting, dyeing, and kind of arranging these objects in compositions that I find particularly blurring or interesting. A few months ago, I was doing something pretty similar, but focusing on mold making instead. But here at this residency and for the past couple months, I've been focusing on object surfaces rather than mold making.
And in the past, you transitioned from mold making to working with individual objects. I'm wondering, did this open up something for you, just working with this kind of special, unique object, or are you hoping to go back to multiples?
That's a good question. I think eventually I will be returning to casting multiples of the same objects. But yeah, it's definitely opened up different ways of making. Like I've never really burned soldered surfaces before or had a very intimate relationship with wood in terms of sanding, tinting, dyeing, and by no means am I an expert in that right now, but certainly a little bit more.
And for those who missed your artist talk yesterday, I think that's going to be online, but you mentioned Japanese cultural traditions. I believe it was the Oban Festival. Mm-hmm. Can you elaborate on how you kind of focused on that tradition and how it informed your art? Like what was the kind of discovery, and then how did it manifest into what you're doing now?
Yeah, totally. I was just drawn to that specific ceremony, which happens during the summer. Essentially, it's a short period of time wherein ancestors are beckoned back to the world, and there's various ceremonies and rituals that sort of lead up to this more grandiose Obon festival, which typically takes place at a Buddhist temple. And there's a lot of different activities and moments of prayer and ritual, I suppose. But I think like the element of that I most aligned with was this cyclical dancing that happens throughout the ceremony. There's different specific songs that are sung, but essentially what happens is there's a centrally placed singer, or these days a speaker, playing these songs where there's specific dances that go along to each song, and depending on the region of Japan, the songs can vary, but people will gather around and do these somewhat simple dance moves. I mean, I certainly tried to do them this summer and I was not an expert at all. But I was attracted to these like somewhat simple dance motions that, anyone like a child can do. And it's believed that through these like dance motions, ancestors are beckoned back to this world. And I thought that it's like a nonverbal communication that transcends time and space and verbal language itself. I found that very interesting. And that kind of nonverbal communication, positioning of the body has kind of seeped its way into many different elements of my practice, whether I'm physically positioning rice on a wooden surface or making castings of many different objects and positioning them that way. I think my practice is less about making image or something like that, and more so like gathering small objects, small grains of rice, just like gathering a bunch of little small things, and I'm in my studio lining them up, and like it's like I'm trying to crack a code or something. Yeah.
Oh, I have so many questions following that answer, but you ended with the description of the rice. You have these amazing pieces where I believe it's wood panels and black grains of rice, and you assemble them in paths and many different designs. For those who just want to maybe visualize it, can you describe like how do you cover a whole surface of an artwork? Is it individually placed?
A few years ago, I began a rice series. I want to say maybe in like 2019, 2020. But essentially what that is I take wooden panels, I'll tint them with the sumi ink, like a Japanese calligraphy ink, to make them black or dark gray. And then I have a small bottle of glue and a squeeze bottle. So I'll kind of like squeeze a undulating line onto the surface of a panel. And then I individually, not with tweezers, just like with my hands, will individually place these grains of rice in various lines. And I create more lines out of the glue, add more rice, and it just kind of keeps growing and growing until the panel is fully encrusted. So at the end, it looks like a dark wooden panel encrusted with rice in various patterns. I initially used white and jasmine rice as an entry point, but I eventually moved to different varieties of black rice or wild rice because I found that the light will hit them in a unique way that makes the undulating patterns a little bit more clear.
And I see in your work you're always creatively problem solving and experimenting with materials, and even though it's always changing, I see the connection between how you're working, how your next project exists. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about how precise you are and how decisive you are, but at the same time you're working with rice as a material that can decay, or maybe like animals or bugs can interact with it unexpectedly. So what is your philosophy behind the decaying of your art and the longevity?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think a lot about power and control in my practice, whether that's me kind of letting go of control by using a perishable object like rice. That's kind of me letting go of control, but also the process is extremely controlled because I'm physically touching every grain of rice and putting it on in a very meticulous way. So there's that kind of push and pull there. And then eventually, which is what I'm focusing more on now, is I'm taking these massage objects, which I also see as the form of control. The nice way to put it is we're trying to help our body and make ourselves feel better, but it's also another version of control, like physically grasping a wooden or three-dimensional object and pressing it up against ourselves is us trying to control how we feel or manage how we feel. So yeah, I think maybe I'm lingering away from what you initially asked, but yeah, interesting question. I navigate different types of control. When I burn object surfaces, I think I'm lightly controlling the object. I'm not fully getting rid of it. But if I make a casting of an object, whether it's glass or porcelain or soap, I feel like I really controlled and manipulated the object, so I'm like fully changing it. Whereas what I've been working on Ma's house, nothing is fully cast. Here, it's just a light control of the surface itself.
I thought it was funny. You said 5 years ago you were doing the rice work. It felt like a long time ago.
I know. Maybe in the grand scheme of life, that's not a very long time ago, is it? Pretty recent.
I was interested in the timing of your massage tools and the pandemic. Is that related to the idea of healing as like society or personally, and taking care of the body, or Was that coincidental?
That's a really good question. I never thought about that. I don't think it was pandemic related, but certainly like in the sense of healing. I think maybe at the time, and I guess currently as well, like I just felt the need to heal different parts of myself. Do I think like a massage object that I regularly massage my body will do the trick? Not completely, but I think I still find these objects very beautiful, a very beautiful outlet as a source of healing for sure.
You mentioned earlier the idea of articulation in your artist talk especially. I wonder if you could talk about that as a theme and how it relates to other themes of body, language, and communication. I think that's what we're all trying to do as artists, but yeah. Maybe from your process, how do you approach it?
Totally. Yeah, I didn't do like a deep dive into the dictionary word of articulation, but I think I'm drawn to that in my practice, whether it's the way that we articulate or move our bodies to communicate with ancestors during obon rituals, or I'm also very attracted to Japanese flower arrangement, ikebana, and that's how people will position and articulate flowers as a way to make them look beautiful and alive. But in fact, I actually am not sure if the flower is dead when you cut it from the stem, but it's no longer a viable flower at that point. But we cut them and then we try to articulate them in some kind of way that's very beautiful and is like, I mean, I don't know, in my opinion, like a really intense and real art practice, ikebana, but it's also kind of a manifestation of denial of death or something. Yeah, articulation. I see that in my massage objects too, as they kind of like wield the body or like position the body or like make our inner meridians activate. But yeah, kind of going back with the like how I think my practice is like me sourcing objects and a bunch of little things and positioning them into like a larger thing. That's, I think, probably the largest source of articulation I see in my practice.
And for some reason, I always connect massage work and massage tools, whether it's just with a hand or with these different unique objects. Also with acupuncture work, it's very similar setting, and sometimes the same spaces offer it. But has the tradition of ikebana for the flowers, has that ever manifested in some of the tools? I see you have in front of us something that looks like an antenna. It kind of is supposed to be a photo holder. And then the other also looks like a radio tool.
Yeah, I do think about the physical practice of ikebana, like pressing these flower stems into like a sharp flower frog, which is like a metal thing with spikes on it that you'll just shove the stems into. And I'm glad you brought that up because I haven't really thought about that connection with ikebana as a practice, connecting to how I am making things right now, the body of work that is currently on the table between us, but is what I've been focusing on at Ma's house, are different wooden massage objects and wooden or Japanese sandals with photo holders, hairpins, things like that kind of stuck into them as if they kind of look like antennas or like maybe arrows that have been shot at these objects, which I think that way of making came about because I departed from mold making. When I was making castings of the objects, like out of glass or porcelain, for example, it's not as easy to stab it with another object. You can definitely Dremel it and do various things to make smaller objects stick out of the larger object. But when I'm working with the original wooden object, it's much easier to take a thumbtack to make a small hole, which I can then insert something else into. So I definitely want to think about that more, how that traditional way of positioning flowers is present here now.
And I really like how you're linking the past with the present, with the traditional dance, but also on the table we have, it looks like scans from Japanese language books, along with, I believe you mentioned your mom's drawings when she was a child, and then we have these other tools, whether they're massage objects or it looks like a stone that was found as well. Can you talk about how you started with the textbooks?
Yeah. Again, this is something that I did a long time ago, 5 years ago, and I've been revisiting now. I think I was drawn to the textbooks as a source of instruction of fluency or something. My Japanese is personally, in my opinion, abysmal. Some may disagree. Yeah, I mean, I guess like a little bit about me, like I would go to like a Japanese Saturday school for like the majority of my life. It was just like teaching the language and like maybe culture as well, but mostly the language. And, I despised it. I absolutely hated going. I was not a good student. And yeah, I think a lot of my negative feelings were probably linked to the fact that I was mixed in the class. The majority of kids were like fully Japanese, or maybe other kids were mixed as well. But from what I remember, I was like the only one that didn't have any direct family in Japan. My mom's lineage like begins in Hawaii, and they've been in Hawaii for a long time. So I've already felt this kind of like disconnect, like, oh, I already like look a little bit different from everyone else. And also like, I don't even have like a direct lineage to this country that I can grasp onto. So I'm like, why am I even doing this? I view the textbook as like a funny place of like connection, because I'm like, quote unquote, like connecting to my mother tongue, or, but also like a source of displacement. Like it's like, I know this, and that's kind of embarrassing to me. But there's also, I think I play a lot with humor in my work as well. Like I collect these massage tools that are in the shape of animals, and there's like certain levels of silliness I see within a lot of my pieces. And I see a lot of silliness in the textbooks as well. There's like, I think this is true for many textbooks, but like a cast of characters that are put in various situations that are just funny, in my opinion. And kind of looking more closely at these textbooks recently, I also realized maybe a reason why I was not invested in learning is that the situations these textbook characters were in, or the words and sentences they were using, were just like not applicable to like a 8-year-old me. Like the book was designed, I think, for college, not even high school, college students and adults. So a lot of the subject matter was very like adult in nature, whether it's like about drinking or smoking, or like things that 8-year-olds, at least I, did not participate in when I was 8 years old. So I'm kind of just like looking at like the silliness of that. And I was in Seattle this summer for a residency on Vashon Island, which is an island off of Seattle, Washington. I found my mother's Japanese language textbooks from when she was a kid in the 60s. So I found these like really old Japanese textbooks, and the illustrations are like totally different and very like Dick and Jane-esque. From what I could gather, there's no like cast of characters. It's just like a different style of textbook. And as I knew that she had these, I've seen them before, but as I was like flipping through them this past time, I noticed that they're like extremely specific textbooks for like Japanese kids in Hawaii. So a lot of like the imagery or the words used were like specific to Oahu specifically, which is where she's from. And I found that specificity very interesting in contrast to like the ambiguity and like adultness of the books that I was fed. The book's very interesting and beautiful, but also very tragic in a way. The books were designed for these young Japanese kids, whether they're like first, second generation, to kind of understand this new landscape that they're in, which is eventually a landscape where there's mostly Japanese people now. It's like they kind of like took it over in a very intense way, which I find tragic and interesting. I'm interested in gathering these images from her textbooks as well as my textbooks. Sometimes I'm coupling them together, sometimes I'm not, or combining them with other massage tools. Massage tools are like what I mentioned earlier, what I consider to be objects of power. So is like a textbook teaching you how to communicate, teaching you how to articulate, or with these Japanese textbooks from Hawaii, like kind of teaching you how to like not explicitly take over a place, but it's kind of what happened. Yeah, most of my practice is not image heavy, so I'm not sure about what's going on with these images yet, but maybe I will sometime soon.
Oh, thank you for that. And so many questions about the seriousness and the humor and the tragedy all in one object. But I wonder, I'm thinking about the question of belonging. So you talked about the language class and how you kind of felt like an outsider, even though you should have felt like you belonged. Do you ever think about, with your drawing practice that you used to often, creating your own kind of instructional book about how you should carry yourself or how to present yourself in these ways?
That's a funny question. I don't know if I've thought about my practice as instructions. I think some of the arrangements, some of my sculptural arrangements to me are kind of like signals or signs or emblems, which could indicate some kind of instruction. I think rather than instruction, I veer more towards playground as the space I'm interested in. I think these days I focus less on the question of belonging and more so the ability to play in where I am right now. For example, some of these massage tools were once kind of cute animals with rolling wheels that you'll put on your body. I kind of liberated them by, I mean, I say liberated, but maybe I further destroyed them. But I kind of took off the wheels, tinted them in a cute pink color, them on the wall, positioning them in a new way, which unleashes strange playground territory. When all my work is displayed on the walls, I use the walls, I use the floor, I use the ceiling as places for display. And I don't know, to me, it's like a strange playground. Yeah.
I like that you bring that up because, as you mentioned before, we're sitting in front of a lot of the objects you've created at Ma's House recently. And I wonder, like, if you had a endless budget, would you ever see your work as being sculptural or 10 times magnification or something you can engage with, like, as a playground?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I think about scale a bit with my work. The individual sculptures themselves are pretty small, but I think they do have a large scale because when I install them, I like to floor or wall with these. The space that they take up is a part of the piece. Maybe it's like a small 5-inch by 3-inch thing on the wall, but I want to make sure that there's a lot of blank space around it. The physical objects themselves are pretty small, but the space they occupy, the space they forge is rather large. So I haven't explicitly thought about making these objects bigger, but more so making a bunch of casts of them, and then those casts will take up a wall or something of that scale. As I'm kind of approaching image making territory or image gathering territory, I'm thinking about scale a bit more. I'm printing these pretty small because I'm just using a typical printer, but with a larger printer, these could be huge. That's what I'm gravitating towards scale. I think like with these sculptural works, there's like a sense of timelessness, or like they kind of can be from any time, I think. But I find when like images are small and there's a lot of them put together and they're on an 8.5 by 11, like that's from today, it's from this morning actually. And I think that kind of like removes like that ambiguity of time. So I think scale is like what I want to pursue with image making in the future.
And one of the objects that are in front of us on the table is a duck massage tool that used to have wheels and you can roll it over your body, and for some reason it has this duck shape. It kind of reminds me of the wooden duck decoys that we had at Shinnecock, but they would be for hunting purposes, and eventually they became so revered for their craftsmanship, they became collector items. So I'm looking at the craftsmanship of this piece. I'm wondering, with one of the installation photos that you shared of one of your exhibits, what is it about creating forms and casting them and creating multiples? Like, why do you pursue that process?
Totally. I think it's linked to like the ambiguity of the original object itself. Reflexology objects or massage tools are like designed with specific curves or specific points and protrusions that are meant to be pressed on your body in specific ways. When you understand that that's what the object is and you see the object, you're kind of like, oh, that makes sense. But when you initially see the object, if you don't know the context, for me at least, I'm like, what is that? What is this like strange lumpy thing or this strange spiky thing that's like kind of beautiful but kind of scary, but I don't know how I feel about it. And I think that's where mold making and casting kind of came in a little bit. I'm very interested in the ambiguity of the form. And I think I can add layers of ambiguity or obscure the object even more when I transform the material completely. For example, I have a wooden panel with protrusions for your feet that you would stand on. And the original object is very clearly for the feet. There's a painted foot on it and words that describe things. But when I cast it, all of the paint, all of the text is removed. It's just like the physical form of the wooden board and the protrusions, which kind of obscures the object a bit more. And yeah, I mean, I continue to do that with just like manipulating the surfaces of the objects themselves. I don't know, it's more clear what the object is when it's still wood and not like fully glass. I'm really interested in the ambiguity and kind of the beauty and I think these objects hold simultaneously like a beauty and a horror to them, and they kind of look like weapons, but they're not. I don't know, I find that very fascinating.
Oh, definitely. And I wanted to go back to your bio and the fact that you also curate in addition to doing visual art. And there's, in my opinion, a recent trend of artists curating shows, and it's been a really interesting shift. But I wonder, there's so many artists who are doing so much subject matter and so many themes, but what's unique to your work and curation is you're using these massage tools, which are in the realm of care. And a lot of people say curating is caring for objects. So I wonder how your personal practice informs how you put shows together and display other people's artwork.
Yeah, that's a really beautiful saying. I haven't heard that before. I'm thinking about a couple notable projects I've done in the past. I did a show called Deliverance with the friend Megan Mi Lee at Trestle Art Space, and we showed our work together. Then I did another show at Underland Gallery in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, New York with myself, my good friend Isabella DiMatteo, and our really good late friend Allison Saltz, who passed away a few years ago and was also an artist with us. With the show of Isabella, Allison, and I, that was for sure like an act of care. She passed away before she could do her thesis show. I think she was an amazing painter, and I found her very inspiring as an artist and as a friend. So I think us working so hard putting together this of care, but also celebration of her life, that was really important to me. It certainly wasn't a memorial any means. We didn't really include her death year in the bio, but it's not necessarily something you would know going into the show, and people didn't need to know because it was just about the show and the care and camaraderie that was happening. I think that's like how care primarily manifests in my curation work. And in addition to my practice, I work at the archives at Brooklyn Children's Museum, which has a very substantial archive of about 30,000 cultural objects and natural science specimens. Those objects are displayed throughout the museum. We recently did a collaboration called Collections Connections with a bunch of different Brooklyn Public Library branches. So these objects are traveling to library branches and also public schools and other places. I consider it pretty separate from my fine art practice in terms of concepts and types of objects. But that's also an act of care, I think, bringing these objects out from the archives to schools and libraries. At Brooklyn Children's Museum, we consider our collection to be an educational collection, which means that the power of the objects really most evident when the object is in our visitors' hands rather than behind a glass case or being preserved forever in a temperature and humidity controlled environment. It is important for us to ensure that these objects have the longevity that they are meant to have, but ultimately it's when these objects are with the kids or with the caregivers.
So that totally makes sense between the playfulness and the playgrounds you mentioned earlier and working at the Brooklyn Children's Museum. I wonder, because your work is so socially engaged, whether it's like the intimacy of the massage tools or referencing ceremonies and community events. I wonder at the Brooklyn Children's Museum, do you actually work with like school groups or children? Or are you more of the admin and background type of office work?
Definitely the admin background type of office work.
Okay.
Yeah, I do have a history with like education. Like I used to do more public programs, particularly with the Children's Museum of Manhattan. Now this was many years ago, but yeah, these days it's mostly back end.
And I'm going to shift to your time here at Ma's house. We're kind of wrapping up on your time here. You're just here until Sunday, which is tomorrow. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your time here, what you've been working on, if you have any tips for future resident artists, and if you have any other residencies that you're heading to after this.
Yeah, so what I've been working on here is continuing the soldering practice of burning these wooden objects and tinting and staining them. For example, there's a massage tool that I was thinking about sealing instead of burning, but then you showed me this wood stain that you have. I never would have bought a pink wood stain for my own personal use, but because it was here, that could be interesting, and I'm actually so glad that I did it. Maybe I'll buy some of that when I get back to Brooklyn.
What would you describe this color? Is it salmon, or is it like pencil eraser color?
Pencil eraser. I think the can says coral, actually, but yeah, coral pencil eraser. I've just been continuing burning objects and combining photo holders, hairpins, other keychain type things objects. I've also, like I mentioned earlier, been going through my image collections of textbook images, and also this Japanese comedy show that I think is very profound and silly and also kind of deals with language and fluency. I think today, yeah, I'm going to continue to burn objects, also experiment with photo transfers on canvas as well. Yeah, that's what I've been focusing on mostly here.
I know you've attended other residencies in the past.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could describe like how is Ma's House a little bit different or unique from those experiences?
Yeah, totally. More homey. I mean, it's in the name, right? Ma's House. It's definitely like a house that's living and breathing with history, and also history, but also the present, because there's like public programs are happening, and there's like an art exhibit downstairs, and this like downstairs area that we're in has a bunch of materials and tools that are used for a lot of community engagement, which I think is awesome and beautiful, and is not something I've particularly experienced in other residencies I've done in the past. This is definitely much more community oriented in a beautiful way. Also, I mean, I've never in my like adult brain, recall being on a reservation at all. So like that's obviously like unique and holds a lot of significance and history and presence as well.
Maybe following up, since you're based in Brooklyn, do you have any other connections with Indigenous people, like individuals, nonprofits, communities at all, or is this your first kind of major connection?
I mean, I definitely have friends that are Indigenous. It's not like I'm friends with them because of that. It just happened to be in New York, specifically with Brooklyn Children's Museum. We invite different cultural partners, whether it's the Lenape Center or other individual artists, to either do public programming or advise exhibits or various NAGPRA explorations, those kind of processes. There's people I'm in touch with for that. But in terms of making artwork in connection to that, not particularly, but yeah.
All right. I was just curious. And before we conclude the interview, I wonder if you have any exciting things that you can give a peek into in terms of new projects, new directions of your art, shows that you're curating, anything you like to promote or share.
I think this past year has been very exhibit heavy for me. I had a solo show at the Susquehanna Art Museum in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania earlier this year, as well as the 2-person show with Nasli F.A. at Underland Gallery in New York. I have some exhibits coming up next summer to a residency called Pillow Fort Art Center sometime next year that has not been established yet. Also planning to go to Studio Kura, which is a residency in Fukuoka, Japan, which I'm very excited about because I haven't been to Japan in a few years. I'm so excited to find some footing there once again. I have a website that I recently updated, kianikodama.com, and I also somewhat regularly post on Instagram as well at kiani.kodama.
So make sure you follow Kiani on Instagram, go to their website and subscribe to the newsletter. But I think that's all the questions. So Kiani, I want to thank you again for being on the Ma's House podcast. Thanks for taking part in the residency.
And, thanks for inviting me to your home, basically.
Hopefully you'll continue following Kiani's work online, and thank you all for listening.
Thank you.